Today I'm going to take a look at the Veiko concealed hinge jig. Hinge jigs make the process of drilling the holes for concealed hinges faster and easier by eliminating most of the marking and measuring that would normally be required. Plus, you don't need to check the depth of the hole. This is the best hinge jig I've seen available for sale, but it's missing one key feature that would make it so much better. Comes nicely packed in this sturdy cardboard box with more than enough plastic foam to keep it secure. It would have been great to see a biodegradable or easily recyclable product here rather than the plastic foam. Cardboard inserts, for example, would have done the job really well without needing to have this giant bit of foam going into landfill. It's a nicely finished anodized aluminium construction. It comes assembled, so you don't need to build it, although in reality it would only be a couple of screws to do that. And it looks and it feels great. The finishing and the quality is clear. For example, when you see these lovely knurled steel screws on the back, there's no sharp edges, everything feels great. Sadly for me, the drill bit also didn't have sharp edges, but more on that shortly. The jig secures to the workpiece with a toggle clamp. It's a standard toggle clamp, so there's no automatic depth adjustment. And if you want to adjust the clamp for different thicknesses of boards, you'll need a spanner to loosen one of these two nuts. I feel like that's kind of annoying, and probably I'm not going to have the spanners on me. It's a standard M6 bolt, so it's a standard size nut, but still. I changed one of mine for this knurled version, and that works much better. But equally, you could use a wing nut. One thing to note is that you can't really use the jig without the clamp, so you require clear access to the back of the door being drilled, which means if you're doing that on a workbench, which you probably are, you need to let the door overhang the workbench. These two knurled screws allow you to control how far in the edge of the 35mm hole should be from the edge of the door, with options at 3, 4, 5 and 6mm. You simply screw them into the corresponding hole on both sides and you're good to go. The jig comes with a third screw that you can put in either side if you want to use that to reference off the end of the door. If you don't use that, then you can line up these 2 points with a line in the door to locate where to drill. Ideally, the bottom point would be slightly longer to make it easier to line up when you're further away from the edge of the door. The Forstner bit is snugly held with this bearing, and a copper washer protects the bearing from the enclosed collar, which acts as a depth stop. Also, if you're wondering why I happen to have pink sparkly nail polish on, well, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and when she asked if she could paint my nails after I painted her nails, it was tough to say no. To set the depth of the drill bit, you need to measure your hinge, but also remember to add the thickness of this small lip here, which obviously I forgot the first time I used it, and it took me a few minutes to figure out why my hole wasn't deep enough. This lip is just under 2mm thick. When you're drilling, all the pressure that you're exerting is on the drill bit, not the bracket, so the bracket's quite loose. And that means it's hard to know that you're staying exactly vertical, which in reality I don't think that's a huge issue, as the hinges tend not to be a snug fit. But I find myself always struggling to try and hold the bracket when I'm drilling. Maybe I could just let go of it, ignore it, and try and keep it roughly straight, but I find myself going to hold it. And I think if the bracket was somehow secured in the jig, then that might make it feel a little bit more robust. Unfortunately, in the drill bit that I received, it had some issues. I'm not exactly sure what it was. I guess it's blunt. I felt like I had to exert a lot of pressure to get it to cut, and I often had burning in the hole, particularly around the edges. The first few times I used it, I started the hole with this bit, then switched another bit to finish it. And I think that also highlights another issue with this jig, is that it will only fit a bit with a 12mm shank. The other bit I have is 11mm, and I've struggled to find another 12mm bit for sale, partly because the shank size is often not specified, so if you ever need to replace the bit, you could be in trouble. Recently though, it has started to cut a little bit better, and I used it on the last project I did, and it worked okay. Not as good as my other one, but it was okay. I think I'll also try sharpening it with a diamond file and see if that yields any improvement. Once you've drilled the main 35mm hole, you can then swap the brackets over and use this one to drill the 2 screw holes. There's 3 spacing options, which I think cover most, if not all, common spacings. Different brands seem to use different spacings, so check your hinges and the orientation of the bracket before drilling yours, because sometimes the bracket needs to go in upside down. The 2 measurements that are given for them, the first measurement is the distance between the holes, and the smaller measurement is the distance from the center of the 35mm hole to the center of these 2 little holes. The Craig jig, for example, or other jigs that I've seen, only have 1 spacing option. So if your hinges don't fit that, then that bit of functionality is useless. For some reason, I also noticed that sometimes when I use this, the holes don't line up perfectly, like they're not exactly straight. I don't know why that is. Maybe I put the jig on squint. Maybe it's because of the bit of play in the bracket, or there's a little bit of movement of the drill bit within the bushing. And so I've not really tested it thoroughly, but I also don't think that that represented a huge problem. Dust collection. I feel like that's where this jig could be so much better. You may have noticed that drilling the 35mm holes creates a lot of shavings, and I think they really missed a trick here by not adding a dust extraction port to this jig. The whole operation would be much cleaner and more efficient if you could attach your shop vac to the jig and have no mess to clear up when you're done. I've very crudely tried a couple of different things. I just zip tied my dust extractor onto the jig, and that definitely helped. But what helped hugely was adding some kind of block at the other side of the jig so that the shavings were not being pushed out there and all the air was sucking through the jig. I think there's loads of space. You know, you could have more fixings. It doesn't need a lot of space to accommodate the chippings, because if you're sucking them out straight away, then they never stay there and they never get clogged up. Another thing that this jig doesn't cover is anything to drill the holes for the other side of the hinge. Generally they're 32mm apart, and a third bracket that fits into this jig could have taken care of that quite easily. Might have cost a little bit more, but probably could have been worth it. However, overall, I really like this jig. I think it's a nice piece of kit. I enjoy using it because it feels good in the hand, and it makes the operation of drilling these holes so much easier and more efficient. I think it's best suited to someone kind of in my position, where I do a few of these at a time every few months. I think if you're going to be doing this every day or every week, you'd probably want to get a dedicated drill press or even a dedicated machine. At £60, $70 from Banggood, I think it's okay value. I think the plastic ones at like £40 seem crazy to me. I really wouldn't want to be drilling through a plastic jig every day. Maybe this could be a little bit cheaper, but overall I think it's a good piece of kit and I'm glad I've got it.